you mentioned how they were able to pretty much load up on Anthony Edwards. But if you even go back a series before that, there wasn't too many options that they had to worry about outside of Shea. You did have J Dub, Jalen Williams, that was kind of that secondary initiator or being the initiator for those groups that did not have Shea on the court at the time. But lo and behold, it was pretty much just being able to focus on just one ball handler. It wasn't many threats out there outside of a few guys that they had to worry about. And I think that's where Boston is a little different, as you mentioned, where they're one of the few teams in the NBA that have a lot of guys that can initiate the play or bring the ball up. And honestly, they have a lot of green light for each player as well. We talked about how frustrated we were with the shots they took against the Pacers in those first two games at home. And it does seem a little sporadic when you look at the game, but that just goes to show you how much leeway and how much a long leash these guys have and the green light they have to be able to make plays on their own. So I think that's kind of a danger and a curse in a few ways because it's one of the things you kind of become a little frustrated with the Celtics about, especially down in clutch time. You know who the ball is going to for Dallas. You know that either Luka or Kyrie are going to be the guys that are going to make the play happen at the end, which we saw in the last series with the game winner that Luka hit. And Boston in those spots, they haven't been put in too many of those so far this season or this postseason, really. And it's kind of a question of like that monkey on their back that they haven't really been able to get over with just being able to handle those clutch situations, which I will give them credit they did in the last two games in the Indiana series where they were trailing going into the last quarter and things of that nature, and they were able to pull it off. But that's just been the thing that's haunted them for the postseason for these past few years. So it's interesting to see that. And as you mentioned, the pick and pop game, having Porzingis to come back, that's such a big deal because it's going to force Lively and Gafford to have to be on the perimeter rather than in the paint. And I think there are ways to go about that. But like you mentioned, even if you look at Kyrie and Luka, they're not necessarily going to be able to hide too much. I would expect them to be put on Drew Holiday and Derek White, just because like you got Tatum and you got Jaylen Brown, you're probably looking at your Derek PJ Washington taking on those two assignments. So the lesser of the four is pretty much just Drew Holiday, where his off the dribble shot creation hasn't been that high of a level, even if you go back to their championship run in Milwaukee. Granted, he did have to take those shots. It was a lot different type of shots that he was taking, just being one of the primary and best players on that team. With Boston, he's been able to kind of fall into a better slotted role, but still, that's not his main strong suit that you look at when you think of Drew Holiday. You think about his defensive ability to guard the ball and things of that nature, and you kind of think of the offensive stuff second. And Derek White is probably your higher level off the dribble shot creator, one of the best two-way guys we have in the league, but still those are the better matchups if you're looking to put Kyrie and Luka on somebody. So it's going to be interesting to see how they compete because they've gotten a lot of credit for their defense. And I think this is just another step up as far as a challenge for those two to see how they're going to be able to contribute on the defensive end. And then you think about Lively and Gafford, as we mentioned, how are they going to be able to guard perimeter type players? You know, Gobert is a guy you can clog the paint on. They did well against Chet Holmgren, but he was more of your frail type player. Horford's a pretty big body. Porzingis is taller, longer, has been in the league longer. He's more of a veteran, but probably more physically up to par as you would expect for an NBA player. So I think this is very interesting on both ends. And you look at Boston, who they played in this postseason. I don't think they've seen a backcourt this well or offense with two threats that you have to pay this much attention to because you look at the first round, they played against the injured Miami Heat, who has given them trouble in the past. But you look at Jimmy Butler not being there and some other players as well. Then you look at the Cavs. Donovan Mitchell got hurt in that series where Cleveland actually stole a game in Boston. And then you look at Indiana, who they swept through. Tyrese Halliburton got injured. So the focal points of those teams for their offense were not there. And to be honest, this is the first time they're really going to see two offensive threats, especially on this type of level. This is probably one of the best backcourts in the league, if not the best currently right now that they're going to have to face. This finals is a big adjustment for both teams and something vastly different than what they've been seeing so far this postseason. And I think this should be a longer series than all the other series we've seen. We know Boston swept through Indiana. We know that Dallas pretty much got the Timberwolves out there pretty quick. So I like that both teams are rested up. I like that they've had a week to prepare for this matchup. And I think we're going to be in for a long series, which is what I'm hoping for the finals.
Yeah, I expect that as well. And I think what you were talking about in terms of the matchups is going to be the biggest key or the thing, at least that I'm looking forward to the most. You talked about how Jason Kidd is going to have to find who to put Luka and Kyrie on and who they're going to have to guard. And I do think that is going to be probably a guy like PJ Washington on a guy like Jason Tatum, and then Derrick Jones Jr. on Jaylen Brown, because PJ does a better job of guarding pull up jump shooters instead of just straight line drivers. And I think Derrick Jones Jr. guards a guy that can get to the basket and go off the dribble a little better because he has a little bit more quicker feet than PJ does. But that's who I think is going to start out in terms of the main two guys on the Boston Celtics. But then I think Luka and Kyrie is going to be between Derek White and Drew Holiday because, like you mentioned, those are the third and fourth option on the Boston Celtics team, right? So that's just how the matchups go. But the only thing is, like in the Indiana series, especially before Halliburton got hurt, no matter who Halliburton was on, they would give it to that person and they would run some sort of action and just look to attack Halliburton, right? So I think that the Boston Celtics would do something very similar to whoever they feel has a really good matchup, whether it's against Luka or it's against Kyrie. I think that they will attack it, whether it's Drew Holiday or it's Derek White. And those guys are really good in terms of coming off a pick and roll or initiating a play, right? So I think that is going to be something that's really interesting. How does Dallas handle that? And to your point about who's going to guard Porzingis in that pick and pop, I actually think that we might see a little more of Maxi Kleber, especially since he's coming back. I think he's going to be an interesting piece to keep an eye on because I don't think Gafford is the answer in terms of perimeter wise against any player on the perimeter. He's more of the big body that protects the rim, and he does a great job at that. But when you look at it, Lively and Maxi Kleber, they're the best at guarding the perimeter in terms of the bigs that they have on that team. So I think you might see a little more of Maxi Kleber and Lively in this game in terms of minutes rather than Gafford. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that shakes out because I think with Porzingis popping and with Horford popping and spacing the floor, I think those two players, Maxi Kleber and Lively, might be the better options for most of the minutes. But I'm still, looking forward to seeing how that turns out. And then offensively for the Mavericks, I'm really looking forward to seeing how they attack the Boston Celtics defense because, like you talked about earlier, I think we'll see a mix of a lot of coverages, right? I think we will see some switching. I think we will see some drop coverage. And if Luka or Kyrie has it going, I think we will see some sort of blitzing of the ball screen, right? And then with Luka, especially him, I think he will try to take advantage of Porzingis in pick and roll. I think he will try and find who Porzingis is guarding and then bring him into the pick and roll, maybe even get a switch or attack it going downhill if they're in drop coverage or something like that. And if someone like maybe Derek White is guarding a specific guard, I think they'll try to do a guard to guard screen and get Derek White into some sort of action with Luka because Luka is the bigger player, right? So he can do something similar to what he did with Jaden McDaniels or a smaller guard and try and get him on the backside as he's coming downhill in the pick and roll and then just manipulate it and force the big to help and throw the lob or he has the shot similar to what they did with the Timberwolves when Luka was running pick and roll. So I think they have some advantages that they can get into, but it's just going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out. And then from there, it's just seeing how the coaches make adjustments in the chess game that they play. So I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I really want to see what happens in clutch time situations for these games because, like I said, that's been Boston's Achilles heel for the past few years, just with turnovers and careless plays. They even showed it in that first game against Indiana that they were lucky enough to come out of a win with just turning the ball over in situations that are unforced and seeing how they can combat when Luca and Kyrie are just being able to dissect the defense because it seems as though Dallas likes that slower pace type game where they're willing to walk the ball up the floor because that's how Luca operates anyways. We know that Kyrie has become better at being able to just pick his spots of when he's going to be aggressive and play off of Luca in that tandem as well. Where Boston, sometimes it kind of looks like they're coming down and taking the first shot available when we feel like they could really work on creating advantages and opportunities. We know that they do like, quick specific actions like pin downs and dribble handoffs coming from the corners or uphills and stuff like that, where it's kind of just more so action based where the Mavs are going to kind of walk you down and make sure they get the matchup or force you to make a decision, force your bid to come out and switch, or Luca's going to, probe down and keep the defender on his back and get closer to the paint. And that's where he's really dangerous. And that's why I say I feel like the Celtics will do a lot more switching because they don't want to allow him to keep a defender on his back as he's making his way closer to the basket and the paint because we know that his float game is valid and also he's able to get you to bite on that floater and then throw that lob to the vertical threat of a Derek Lively or Gafford. And if he's able to do that, that's going to allow Gafford and Lively to stay on the floor as well. Because if they're providing you positive production offensively, then that allows them to stay on the floor because you already know what they're going to be able to do at the rim defensively. So I think it's a lot of matchups. Like there's a lot of things that play into each other's strengths and a lot of things that play into each other's weaknesses. And as you mentioned, the coaches, just the adjustments that they make. And it's not that, the weaknesses they face are things they can't deal with. It's just seeing them make that adjustment because that's all the playoffs is about. Every team you play in each round is going to be different from other teams and it's all about matchups. So just seeing how they're able to utilize their strengths and stay away from their weaknesses when the opposing team is still good at exposing those weaknesses, I think that's one of the most important and interesting things to look forward to.